Hello. So I'm recording this video because the upcoming interviews center a lot around the conversations around autogynephilia. Um, since recording these interviews, I've learned a lot more, and there's a few things I want to add because the order in which I created these podcasts is actually kind of reversed. In that my interview upcoming with Ray Alex Williams is one of my first that I actually recorded. After which is Aaron. They're actually my first two. Now, I didn't really understand or know a lot about the theory of autogynephilia when I went into these, so excuse my ignorance during the podcasts. I have some problems with the theory of autogynephilia. Not the fact that it exists. Of course it exists, and adult males have this thing. It's self-reported, it exists. I'm going to get called one of two things, which is what the proponents of this theory go to. Because I'm an adult male who transitioned or almost transitioned while married, I'm going to get called either a narcissist or I'm lying. I can self-report myself that I am not an autogynephile. I went through something which was very unique to me, which was, again, I write about in my book, and you can read that. I'm going to summarize my problems with it with a few different examples. So the first one is Ray Blanchard himself stated this in a tweet. On numerous occasions, my writings on autogynephilia have been mischaracterized as stating that autogynephilic gender dysphoria is nothing but a fetish. What I said is virtually the opposite, as illustrated in the following example. Theory relating to autogynephilia and transsexualism must explain the following well-established observation. Gender dysphoria in young non-homosexual males usually appears along with or subsequent to autogynephilia. In later years, however, autogynephilic sexual arousal may diminish or disappear, while the transsexual wish remains the same or grows even stronger. Such histories are often produced by gender dysphoric patients. One does not have to rely on self-report to accept that the transsexual motive may attain or inherently possess some independence from autogynephilia. The same conclusion is suggested by the fact that surgical castration and estrogen treatment, which decrease the libido in gender dysphorics as in other men, usually have no effect on the desire to live as female or the resolve to remain in that role. Ray Blanchard, 1991, Clinical Observations and the Systematic Studies of Autogynephilia, Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy. I'm now going to read to you a self-reported, who probably doesn't know they are, autogynephile. And by the way, all of this data is self-reported. People will say that it goes by observable behaviors, but those observable behaviors are viewed through the lens of wanting to prove that everything is already autogynephilia, so we can surmise that the people who are saying that these are observable behaviors are already on the autogynephile train, therefore they're entering from a biased place, therefore their investigation into this is not scientific. Whenever a self-report comes in that goes against what they're saying, they just say that person is lying, which from a data gathering perspective means their entire theory is nonsense, because their entire theory is based on self-reporting. And if data pops up that you don't like, and you just say that data doesn't count because I don't like it, because that person's lying, because I think they have a reason to lie, you can't do that. It's not science. So gender science, as it's known, in all its forms, is not science. So this is someone on Reddit. And again, like I said, if we're just going by self-reporting, I can go by self-reporting too. Is there a way to transition medically M to F without losing my male libido? Without my libido, I am not transgender. Asking as I've come to determine my gender identity as reliably woman, essentially always when I have a male libido. But when I am on estrogen and Spiro, which over time would achieve the female hormones and the female appearance, I feel complete alignment with being a man. I am off hormones currently, estrogen and Spiro, and I would like to be a woman really bad. But I know once I'm back on hormones, very soon my libido will again be dead. And so, too, essentially will be my desire to be a woman. Now, what this person on Reddit is describing is autogynephilia. But what Ray Blanchard described in his own paper, where the transsexual wish was separate, is not autogynephilia, because it's not sexually driven. So in his own paper, he describes something that isn't within his theory. So it's contradictory on that level already. The second problem with it is, in the following video, which I'm about to show you, Roy Blanchard describes homosexuality as more akin to a paraphilia. A paraphilia, like autogynephilia, is some kind of sexual fetish. Again, people will say you're not really understanding it, it's not a sexual fetish, but I'm getting really tired of the mental gymnastics around it.
Should we understand homosexuality, either male or female homosexuality, as a paraphilia or as something different, something in its own category?
There are a couple of different, well, there's probably more than two, but there are two main schools of thought on this, which I would regard as respectable. One view, which is held by a number of my colleagues and friends and people whom I respect, is that homosexuality and paraphilia are qualitatively different entities, that these are different natural kinds, and that you shouldn't be speaking of homosexuality in the same breath as paraphilias because these are unrelated phenomena. That's one school of thought, and it depends on making some pretty strong assumptions about the biological causes or any causes. It makes strong assumptions about the causes of homosexuality versus paraphilia. But it's a respectable point of view. The other point of view to which I personally am closer is that society labels certain non-reproductive sexual interests as bad and others as more or less okay, and society has decided that paraphilias are one thing and homosexuality should not be classed with the paraphilias, but I see that as more of a socio-political distinction than as a distinction where we can really point to a lot of hard empirical evidence.
Further to this, my whole goal in speaking out has been against the idea of medicalizing children. I find the idea that we can apply any of this science to kids detestable. I also find the idea that whenever I see people talking about autogynephilia and saying it applies blanketly to all straight men who want to transition, they tend to be one of two people. They tend to either be self-confessed autogynephiles or women. And the people who say that there is a propensity for males of a different kind, or straight males, a different reason for straight males to want to transition, generally tend to be men, and generally tend to actually know. The other problem I have is in this interview, well, the third and final problem which relates to that, I have in this interview with Annie Lawrence on Gender the Wider Lens podcast, where they essentially, he, she, whatever you want to call them, says that we should castrate little boys, or we should think about castrating little boys who have extreme cases of autogynephilia.
But I think there's more than one way to eliminate the effects of testosterone on the body in adolescence that still allow the opportunity for reconsideration. And that way is castration. Boys have been castrated for purposes of making them better singers, castrati, in the 16th, 17th century. It was not an uncommon procedure. And it wasn't invariably fatal. It didn't always have severe consequences. And imagine that you had a 14-year-old autogynephilic transsexual who was intelligent, who understood her circumstances, who was desperate not to avoid masculinization. What do you do? What does he do? Does he seek out psychotherapy with the goal of qualifying for GnRH agonists? Or does he take it into his own hands to eliminate the source of endogenous testosterone, with the understanding that if he thinks that's a mistake, he can later take testosterone and masculinize normally?
So if this is where this is leading, because if it's sexual orientation, or if it's an innate paraphilia, and we just view sexual orientations and paraphilias as different, and some paraphilias are just popular and others aren't, God, I hate this. I hate this theory so much. Then I guess we're going to just end up with trans children again, aren't we? But this time, we're going to have a mental gymnastic theory that seems scientific on the surface. Anyone who speaks out against it, who has the experience, is going to be branded a narcissist or a liar.
The defense against this is to develop a narcissistic attitude. The contrary view, that one is exceptional, that one is deserving of great respect, that one has entitlement, a certain lack of empathy towards others. Those are some of the classic characteristics of a narcissistic person, an extreme form of narcissistic personality disorder. And I think we see evidence of a lot of that in the persons who attacked Mike Bailey.
And yeah, but with all that out of the way, I do want you to approach these conversations that are coming up with an open mind. This is just where I've landed on the theory, and yeah, call me whatever you want, but the mental gymnastics required to actually get to believing in this theory are quite impressive. Now, as I said, there are two different facets to this. There is the obvious, there are autogynephiles, they exist, and then there is the obviously nonsense side, which is we can apply this to children. This is, I think, the next stage in all of this stuff. Again, like I said, it mostly comes from, well, one of three people. Women who don't understand the experiences of being a man, autogynephiles who are self-confessed and may have other motives for wanting to, apply it broadly to everyone, maybe like normalizing a fetish, which is a thing, and researchers who have staked their entire lives on this theory. So these three groups have, one of them just has a lack of understanding in what the male experience actually is. One of them has a motive. Well, actually, two of them have a motive in wanting this to be a reality. Like I said, I can self-report that I am not an autogynephile. I would just say it if I was. I'm here to be honest. And I think this theory is incredibly harmful. And I think it's going to hurt a lot of kids going forward if these people get their way. I think the idea that it's innate is ridiculous, because to be completely honest, the only way that we can know that any human sexuality is innate is if we raised two kids in a white room who never had any interaction and never had any outside stimuli. It doesn't take a PhD to know that. That's just how that works. We can't reliably tell if something is innate or not unless we do that study on a human, which we are never going to do. We can't tell if something is environmental or if it's innate. There has been research to suggest it might be, but how do we know that those how do we know that those characteristics that build up biologically aren't a result of environmental outside factors? We can't. So I really just want people to realize that broadly, gender science is not science. It's not, there is no control group pretty much ever provided, because there can't be. It's based on self-reporting, and then whenever someone counters that self-reporting, they are a narcissist or they are lying. That is a belief system. That is a religion. That is a cult, because when people are heretical to the cult, they are called nasty things.
I don't think we know enough yet.
It's a surprising amount that we don't know.